After Ken talks, and we will have questions from the audience as well. So we're going to start now, go for about an hour, come up with some tough questions. I promised him that you were tough, ambitious students. Prove me right. Warm Tar Heel welcome. Welcome.
I thought I'd begin, take you back in the 50s. And in the 50s, there was a great television commercial. It was 60 seconds, and it had three young boys sitting on a stoop. One was Carroll Hall. Anyone know who he was? Only one of you? Several more. He was actually probably the greatest mayor New York City has ever had. In the 30s and early 40s. The other person on the stoop was Louis Armstrong. How many of you know who he was? More hands on that. Obviously became a great jazz musician. And the third was Barney Pressman. Anyone remember who he was? Barney's clothing store. So they're sitting on the stoop, and the boys turn to each other and they say, Fiorello, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Fiorello says, I want to be mayor of New York. Louis, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a great musician. Barney, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Barney with thick glasses, sitting there looking like a nerd, says, you'll all need clothes. Well, one of the things I learned is that we'll all need advertising. And there's a part of me that doesn't like saying that, because a lot of times I look at ads and I feel manipulated by them. For instance, remember that famous Coke ad of the teenagers standing on the hill from all different countries, singing aloud about what they wanted to do? Every time I watch that ad, I get goosebumps. It's really a very effective ad. But I hate it. And the reason I hate it is because it tells me nothing about Coca-Cola. I just feel emotionally manipulated. And so when people think about why people get angry at advertising, I'm going to talk about that in this talk. One of the reasons is they feel it's manipulated. And one can go in and talk about cigarette ads over the years as a health product, which they put filters on cigarettes, that's how they sold them. But I learned that you'll all need advertising, because when you look at it, without advertising, newspapers would die. Magazines would die. Free television would die. Facebook, 97% of its revenues come from advertising. 90% of Google's come from advertising. Most of the internet is supported by advertising, not by subscriptions, though there are successful subscriptions. So when I looked, I spent almost 3 years doing this book, and I looked at around. I said, after maybe 450 or so interviews, I came to one conclusion, which is that the world of advertising is beset by some of the same disruption that the industries that I've covered for the New Yorker and books for many years now have been assailed by. I've written about newspapers on decline. I've written about television and magazines on decline. I've written about digital companies that go in and then out of the business. I've written about Google and Facebook, how they disrupt legacy media businesses. And I said, it's the same thing happening to advertising as happened to the rest of these media industries. And I found actually that it was. If you look at, and one of the reasons I came up with the title Frenemies, is that increasingly the advertising agencies are beset by people who used to be their partners and now have become their rivals. Think about this. Google and Facebook, a new entry, increasingly they have this data and they go directly to the clients, meaning the advertisers, and they sit bypassing the ad agency, saying we don't have to deal with the middleman, we'll deal directly with you. PR agencies, as newspapers decline, they say we have to get into other businesses. So they become advertising agencies. Publishing companies like the New York Times has 300 people in their sales department. 1/3 of them create ads to clients bypassing the agencies. Consulting companies like Deloitte, that used to be, partners, and in some cases, they're accountants, are now buying ad agencies and competing with them. So suddenly, the ad agency is assailed by people who were their friends, but are now their enemies or competitors. But the biggest frenemy, I found, was the public. Because the public increasingly doesn't want to be interrupted by an ad, particularly on the most personal device in our lives, outside of our wallets and our purses. And that's our mobile phone. We carry it everywhere. We don't lend it to anyone. It's ours. It's very personal. We don't share it. And suddenly, you're going to be interrupted by an ad. So that's why 20% of Americans have an ad blocker on their mobile phone. 1/3 of Western Europeans have an ad blocker on their phone. People who record programs on their PVRs, on cable or satellite, 55% of them don't watch the ads when they watch the programs they've recorded. And then you think about Netflix and HBO and Showtime and Amazon. You don't have ads. So generations of people grow up saying, we don't need to watch ads. And that creates an enormous disruption as well. So one of the things I found in looking at this industry is a tremendous amount of insecurity. And people have to deal with that. And one of the ways I tried to deal with it in the book, I wasn't writing an essay that people might forget and not read. I'm trying to create a narrative, which is something that most of you in journalism are trained and will think more and more about. How do you tell a story in a way that's compelling to readers? So one of the things I tried to do in this book is to create characters, to find characters through which I can tell the story. The most significant character in my book is a man by the name of Michael Cassidy, some odd years ago, called MediaLink. MediaLink is a company that basically is a Sherpa for clients, for ad agencies, for digital companies, and introducing everyone to each other. So if there's a negotiation between the client or the advertiser and the publishing company and the ad agency, Michael Cassidy is at that table, but he happens to represent all three. Who are his clients? Newspapers, it's the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. Studios, it's Disney, it's Paramount, it's many of them, it's 21st Century Fox, it's Google and Facebook and Microsoft. And clients, it's most everything. Unilever, you go down the list. So he's a man who represents all these clients. And one of the reasons that people go to Michael Cassidy is because they're insecure. They say, our business is in turmoil. Change is happening. How do we deal with it? And Michael Cassidy, the Sherpa, sits them down and says, I'll help you. You want to meet the Google people? I know you're worried about them. Come, I'll take you to see them. You want to meet advertising? New York Times, you want to meet some advertisers because we know you're losing advertising? We'll help you. So he becomes a very significant character. But I needed more than Michael Cassidy. I needed some other characters. I've written a book about Google, so I said, I want to concentrate on Google versus Facebook. So I found this woman, Carolyn Everson, who's the head of advertising and marketing for Facebook. Fascinating character. She bridges the world with traditional media, which is a very vibrant personality, works directly with advertisers. They feel very comfortable with her. And yet, her client, Facebook, is dominated by engineers. And she understands those engineers. But she also understands that advertising is not a science, which is what the engineers like to think of it as. So she kind of tries to bridge that gap. But ultimately, she is trying to bypass the agencies and go and deal directly with Facebook, directly with the clients. Mark Saul, the founder of the largest holding company in the advertising world, WPP, 33 years ago, he started this company. He became a character in the book because he represents, there are 6 giant holding companies that have many agencies and marketing companies that work for them. And he was his driving force. Now, he was forced out this past spring. And in the last chapter of my book, I did an interview with him. I spent a lot of time with all these people. And I said to him, Martin, I said, you're going to be 73 this year. When do you expect to step down? He said, they'll have to shoot me to get me out of here. Well, they shot me. And it's just in ways sad, and yet for a journalist, nothing is said. It's good copy. And so it was good copy for me. Another character in my book is Les Moonves. He's become more famous in recent years because of his sexual harassment claims made against him, but I didn't get into any of that. I knew nothing about that, I'm sad to say. I would have reported like hell. But nevertheless, he's a guy who probably was the single most successful modern television executive. And his task was, can I turn this traditional media company into a new kind of media company? And in many ways, he succeeded. If you look at the revenues for CBS, I did a book that came out in 1991 called Three Blind Mice. And that was about television networks being disrupted by a new technology, which was cable. And at that point, CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox was just starting. 100% of their revenues came from one source, advertising. Today, CBS, just 50% of its revenues come from advertising. In 92, Congress passed the Cable Act. The Cable Act said that if cable is going to carry a network program, they have to compensate the networks for those programs. It's something called retransmission consent. Well, last year, CBS got $1 billion in fees to cable companies and satellite companies for their programs. By the way, the other networks also got comparable figures. That's a new source of revenue. The second source of revenue, in 94, again, the importance of government action. Government changed the financial interest rules. It used to be that to prevent a monopoly, they said the network may not own programs and may not therefore sell them to local TV stations in syndication. The network said we're in trouble, cable is coming on, they have multiple sources of revenue, subscriptions and advertising. We don't. Help us. And they got, with their power, they got the Congress to pass the rescinding of the FinCEN rules. So they're allowed to own the programs and sell them. Well, today, if you look at CBS, 23 primetime shows and evening shows, all of them, every one of them, is owned in whole or in part by CBS. That pattern is followed by other networks. So they have another source of revenue. And the third source of revenue that is enabled television, the networks, not to go the way or to fall the way newspapers and magazines have fallen, is they have new digital platforms that provide money. So Netflix comes on, and CBS sells them its programs, right? Last year, they got $250 million that went right to the bottom line, pure profit, from Netflix. And you say, that's really great in the short term. In the long run, it's a disaster. Because what it does in the long run, it says that we are building up a frenemy. Netflix is competing with CBS. And more important than the direct competition is what it's doing intellectually in people's heads. We now know we don't have to wait till Thursday night to watch, or Friday night to watch a certain program. And we also know that we can watch as much of that program as we want on any device we want, portable device or on our television sets. And by the way, we don't have to watch ads on Netflix and Amazon. So think about how disruptive that really is to the world of television. So those are some of the characters that I tried to tell the story of change and disruption that was going on in that world. And then the question people will ask me is, well, where's the future going? Who are the winners and who are the losers? And every time I would go into someone's office and I would say, what's the future? And if they would turn to me and they would say, Ken, let me tell you what exactly the things are going to look like in 5 years. I literally tuned out. I couldn't hear it. It was like going to a Wall Street analyst or a stockbroker and him saying, or she saying to you, if you buy this stock, it will go up 100% in the next 12 months. Anyone who said that to you, you wouldn't believe it. So when this person would say to me, there's too often too many arrogant people would say to me, this is what the future's going to look like, I would tune out, and I knew that it wasn't. But here are some of the questions that I think we don't quite know the answer to. How do you do ads on a mobile phone? A very critical question. And how do you do them in a way that don't feel like an interruption? So what advertisers increasingly say, and this is what they believe, we have so much information about you, so much personal information about you, and we have GPS that can follow where you are on your mobile phone, that we can send you information or service message that won't feel like an interruption because it will feel like we're offering you something and won't let you go. For instance, Ken, you're walking down the street. You're 2 blocks away from this clothing store where we know you bought a sport jacket 2 months ago. If you go the 2 blocks to that clothing store, Ken, we'll give you 20% off the next sport jacket. The question then becomes, and we don't know, there's no way to know the answer to this question. Will Ken say, oh, wow, that's fabulous. I love that. How many people would like that? How many people think it's creepy? And that's the basic question. The basic question is privacy. And that's an issue that all these companies, the holy grail for advertising, people in the agency world today, is data. We need to know more. And one of the things that's happened to ad agencies is that it used to be, how many of you would watch Mad Men, that great show on Showtime? Well, if you remember back in the 50s and 60s with Mad Men, Don Draper was at the head of the table. The creative guy was really driving the client's business. That's no longer true. The people driving that client business now are what's called a media agency, so people who have the data. Because the data allows them to target ads, know who your customer is, who your potential customer is, and how to reach them by targeting a specific media that may reach them. And also to know enough about them that we could actually individually. So it's a rifle shot, not a shot at people. And so those media agencies become real important. So that's another question. People say, is the future going to be big agencies, or is it going to be smaller agencies that are much more mobile, faster, can move much faster? The question becomes, if the media agencies and the data is so important, you almost need the big agency, which has the data that the smaller, more nimble agencies don't have. On the other hand, you get back again to that privacy question. How much data will they be allowed to have? Which gets to another big issue worth thinking about, which is the government. I mentioned before what government did to help salvage the broadcasting industry, at least in the short run. I think in the long run it's not going to salvage the broadcasting industry. In the short run, it replenished them and allowed them to become less dependent on advertising. Well, what can the government do? Well, the government may say, hey, we're going to do what Western Europe did. 28 nations in Western Europe announced that people could opt out of having their data collected by companies. So they, in order to protect privacy. Now, admittedly, Western Europe has more concern traditionally, historically, with privacy issues than we do in the United States. But nevertheless, as many of you thought it was creepy to have that kind of data, Congress, which may ask dumb questions when Mark Zuckerberg appears before them, nevertheless, they know this is a growing concern in this country, and we have to focus on it. So what might they do? Well, the most extreme thing they could do is do what they did against Microsoft in 1999, which is bring an antitrust law. Say you're a monopoly, and the judge in the initial case, I covered that trial in New York, and I wrote a book about it. The judge in that case basically said we should break up Microsoft. I thought that was just a crazy idea. The idea that some bureaucrat could figure out how to engineer a big company like Microsoft and what to split and whatnot. It's crazy because at the time, you think about it, open source and the internet was going to disrupt Microsoft, as it did, without them being broken up. But you could decide that Facebook is a monopoly, Google is a monopoly, or Amazon is a monopoly, or you could do some other things. Privacy is the second thing, as I mentioned, you could do. Third thing you could do is you say, hey, you can't buy your potential competitors and take them over, as say Facebook did when they bought WhatsApp, for instance. And so they could regulate that and just say you will be prevented from buying certain things. Then there are other things they could do. They might say, hey, we have to try and shore up journalism and the media. And, you know, this data that you have on all these individuals, pay them for it, right? Subsidize them. That's one thing that helps the consumer, potentially. Or you can say, hey, Facebook and Google, you're taking all this information from journalists, from newspapers. You're saying it's fair use. And you're making deals with them, but you own the customer, they don't. You have the credit card information, they don't. Meaning that the newspapers don't have that, but the magazines don't have the credit card information. Give it to them. Let's insist that they have it. And if you do that, you obviously create an ability for the journalistic institutions to function in the way they haven't before. In any case, what you have, I would argue, is tons of questions that besiege us and are important to have answers to, but we can't yet have those answers. But this much we know, and this much I think I learned in the almost 3 years I spent before this book. And I would have hated saying this when I started, because I didn't like a lot of advertising. We need advertising. We need advertising. There's no substitution. People can say, hey, let's do subscriptions. My friend Tim Wu wrote a very good book about advertising a year and a half or 2 years ago, and the attention merchants, it's called. And he argued that we have to supplant advertising and replace it with subscriptions. And I think that's a pipe dream, and here's why. The one thing that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump agreed on in the 2016 campaign was that the working class, the American middle class, the bulk of the American population, their income had been frozen for a decade. And the thought that they, who pay an average of about $270 a month for subscriptions, and by the way, that doesn't include gas and electricity costs, the thought that they could suddenly reach into their pockets and pay for Facebook, or CBS, or Google Search, or all these other things. Yes, there are, Amazon Prime is a great, $95, it's a great subscription service. Apple, great subscription services. Showtime, HBO, Netflix, great subscription services. There are great subscription services that work. But the idea that you can replace advertising with subscriptions, I think it is the only people who make that argument who don't do the math. And the math won't allow it. So come back, and I'll conclude with this thought that I've alluded to before in this talk. Advertising really matters. And it matters because without advertising, the world we're studying and entering, be it the advertising world or better, the media world that I've spent much of my professional life covering, will perish. And we don't want that to happen. Thank you.
Advertising matters. I know all those advertising. I want to make sure you've got that hashtag Sarratt Lecture. We want some stuff out there on Twitter. I want to introduce you to our panelists. Many of you know Gary Kay. He is one of our advertising professors and a trailblazer entrepreneur in the startup digital space, an expert on social media branding and new technologies. He is a UNC grad, and check out those Carolina blue suede shoes. That's the real thing. With him, three of his top students in our PR and advertising side of the house. First, Lauren Houston, who was a master's student who worked for NASCAR for 5 years before she came back. She's a double champion and in her second year. Fairly True is one of Gary's top students, an undergraduate, senior, and Carter Dunsler is also one of our undergraduate top students. Not in the MJ school, he is in this track. He brings a whole variety of majors with him, so we like that interdisciplinary piece. And thanks to Gary, every one of you who is here tonight will walk out with a great t-shirt. We want to prove to the world that you were smart enough to come here tonight and to listen to this lecture and to walk out saying, I never liked math, I didn't want to do math, and now they keep saying I got to do math because everything is data. So that's your big takeaway. And Gary, you've got it tonight. You start us off in this conversation.
Well, the t-shirts were actually a bribe, and it did seem to work, so thank you. Giving yourselves a hand. I love the book. I've read it twice. Second time because I wanted to be prepared for this. As I told you before we started, I assigned it to my classes here at the new media classes here at UNC. Raise your hand if you're from my 477 class. Look at that. So they showed up tonight. The alternative was to write a paper. So good choice. They worked. But this was great. One of the things that most intrigued me about the book was sort of your take of the implosion of the fixes in part of the industry, where the industry was sort of taking kickbacks in what could be perceived, if not illegal, certainly unethical practices, causing sort of a start of a fall off the cliff, although the cliff they haven't fallen off the cliff, it's sort of a beginning of either fixing it or at least exposing it. We've seen further implosion driven by other forces like small, as you mentioned, small agencies that are doing really creative, experiential work, that are really doing great work, that are competing with the big six. Do you see that trend continue, or do you see the foothold, because of the data, the foothold of the large agencies sort of dominating that world?
I think the mistrust that you allude to, and that I begin the book with the speech where a former advertising executive tells you one of the reasons the holding companies do this is because they are scared. Their margins are shrinking. They increasingly cut costs. And one of the terrible things, how many of you think about going into advertising? Well, one of the things you're going to discover, and it's people say to me, if you talk about reform, you have to start at the bottom or start at the top. In terms of adding to the holding. If you look at the pay scales in advertising, and I have figures in the book on this from LinkedIn, a LinkedIn study, a very extensive study. Advertising agencies among the lowest paid of the Canadian and for entry-level jobs. And one of the things that produces is that a lot of good people don't want to go in, or they go in and suddenly the client is being represented by a $45,000 a year copywriter who doesn't have the experience that more senior people are working on other clients and they can't afford it. The agency business changed dramatically when they went away from what's called the commission system. 15%, you get 15%, and now it's to be paid by the piece, in effect, people negotiated, and they make much less money, and increasingly the clients are dominated by CFOs and procurement officers who say, hey, advertising is an expense. And the advertising company says, no, it's not an expense, it's an investment. And they say, no, it's an expense. And they cut costs. And that creates more extension and more reasons why the holding company is trying to figure out sly ways to make more money.
Thank you. You brought up Les Moonves in the session today, and Lauren's got a great question that revolves around that.
Yeah, so you talked about a lot of huge key players in your book, multi-millionaire media moguls. On the social justice front, how do you feel that the Me Too movement has affected the media industry, and what is your opinion about how it will affect the next new wave of female leadership?
Well, advertising, like many other industries, is dominated by men, and it's a real source of tension. I tell a story in the book about a woman who's head of communications at one of the agencies, J. Walter Thompson, and the CEO of that agency basically just harassed her in a very vulgar way. She brought him to attention. She went public with it. The WPP, which was the parent holding company of J. Walter Thompson, kept this man, transferred him to Spain, where he's from, but he had a big job in Spain. He didn't lose his job. She went to court, and for 2 years that case stood, and every time he went to a 4A's meeting, which is the advertising agency, the annual meeting, the woman, when they would come up, almost would cry with rage about what was going on here and how Aaron Johnson, the name of this woman, was all along, and she was still supported financially by WPP or J. Walter Thompson. But she basically was alone in court, and they essentially took the side of the CEO. Then, literally months ago, they finally, after 2 years, settled and paid her the settlement. I don't think she will go back to J. Walter Thompson. But it kind of crystallizes that issue of many women feel like they are second-class citizens. Now, there are agencies that are run by women. More so today than 2 years ago when I started. I looked 3 years ago, but it's still disproportionate. And Me Too has a huge impact.
What about Valerie? Have you thought about this? You're going to go into this segment of the industry. You're a PR major. Is it something that's been on your mind? Have you seek out mentorship to deal with that kind of stuff? Because, as he said, it's dominated by men right now. Yeah.
This is definitely something I think me and a lot of my fellow students think about when we're entering the working world. It's definitely something I've considered, and I've been looking a lot into brands that are run heavily by female leadership. So we've been discussing a little bit about ethics through our conversation, and I wanted to ask another question, sort of in the same vein. You spoke on the subject of data availability and consumer privacy, and we saw that even just from our audience, people were weirded out or creeped out by how much companies know about us just from us going on Facebook. Can you share a little bit more about where you think the industry is headed, and how it will combat the effects of public knowledge and consumer fears about data sharing, and how the industry will regulate itself?
I'm generalizing, and it might not always true of everyone having to do that. I was stunned, though, that the people I was encountering and into are not very and we're not as concerned as I think they should have been. Not just about people's privacy, but about the future of their business. If in fact the government or the public rises up and says, hey, you cross the line, that's not acceptable. But if you would ask, and I did regularly ask people out there, what's the line you draw that you won't cross? What I encountered more than not is they never thought about it. Now that's revealing, because if you ask a journalist, where do you draw the line? What won't you do? I mean, most journalists would easily answer that question. Say, well, I won't take something off the record that was and put it on, but I can get that from the advertising people, and I kind of shocked.
I have a question related to something we talked about before the lecture that we're dealing with here in the school. We're hiring a new director of the broadcast sequence, and what is your opinion about? It's related to this, and you alluded to this in your talk. What is your opinion about journalists having opinions on political issues? Because this has become an issue that everybody's talking about.
I actually very agitated about that issue, because when I turn on, if I'm writing and I go in, I write at home, and I like to go somewhere with the kitchen, and I'll go into the kitchen, I'll start cutting up. I like to cook, cutting up the dinner. I'll put on the Facebook TV, or I'll turn on CNN, or I'll turn on MSNBC, and it's all time, the whole hour. And then the blitz that comes on at 5 o'clock, 5 to 6:30 or 7, really, it's all time. I mean, CNN is always posted about having people all just think we're shooting ourselves in the foot as journalists. Because what we're doing is giving ammunition to Trump supporters who believe Trump when he says these outrageous things about the press is the enemy of the people, the press is fake news, which is outrageous and dangerous, and actually it's scary. If you watch what happens at a Trump rally, those reporters are scared, and they should be. And when he goes to the trash can and he singles out that member of Congress who chest bumped the reporter and broke his glasses, and Trump says, I like people like that. I mean, oh my God. I mean, that's really kind of scary. And according to Jim, CNN players, one of the Trump supporters went like this to the White House. So in any case, but nevertheless, having said that, what I worry about is we're giving ammunition to the Trump supporters to believe that we really are fake news, that we really are out to get Trump. And I think that's the journalism. And one of the, Pat Moynihan, the former senator, once said that you're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own fact. And what's happened is that the public is divided, and they get the facts from Fox News, which is different from the facts they get from CNN or MSNBC, or the New York Times. And there's not even a person. The New York Times does a great investigative reporting, as does the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, on Trump's taxes, on women, that he's paid off. And almost 50% of the public doesn't believe it. They don't accept those facts. And I think we have to look at do we bear some responsibility as journalists for why they don't accept it? I wouldn't allow reporters to tweet. I think you don't do that. You're a straight reporter. I don't want you to burden the public with your opinions.
Carter?
Yeah, you touched on television, CNN, Fox News, and I think one of the key takeaways from your work is that idea of disruption, right? People don't watch TV as much as they used to, so advertising on television, it doesn't work. That's not where the money is. And I know, I see that personally. My house, Spectrum calls us once a month to tell us to upgrade and get TV, and we don't need that. We stream everything we want online. And if you're okay with me reading something you wrote in the book, in the Marketing Yik Yak section. Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park was once home to Sun Microsystems, which was this seemingly impregnable tech company that eventually fizzled and was sold. And there's that giant like sign on the campus. And you talked to one of the people there, and she said how if you peek behind the sign, you'll see the old Sun Microsystems sign. And the question is always, well, why? Like, why do they keep it behind there? And the answer is because every time a Facebook employee leaves campus, we want them to remember that at any moment you could become irrelevant. And so that's like this really powerful passage that I found. And I wanted to ask you what you think the next media platform for advertising is. How do we make advertising even more personal? TV is dead, and everything is about mobile. What comes after Facebook and Instagram, et cetera?
If I were arrogant enough to give you an answer to that, I don't know the answer to that question. And by the way, no one else does either. It's all guessing. What you've got to do is throw stuff that's spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And that's what they're doing. But the truth is that advertising, as insecure and anxiety-filled as many of these executives are, there are too many of them who sit back and don't do what the Facebook people do. Don't look at the past, how passive could assail you. And we're in it's fine. I mean, one of the things that I discovered this when I came to think this when I was doing my book that came out in 2009, that there are really two types of executives. I spent a lot of time in the traditional media that were being disrupted by the movements of this world. And what I found is that, and I found the same is true of you, the advertising, that there are two types of reactions that people have. There are people who sit back and say, oh, woe is me, these terrible things, Google and Facebook and the consulting companies and the clients that everyone's doing to me, and it's just terrible. And they become very pessimistic about it. But they feel like victims. And then there are people who lean forward and see change as an opportunity, not a problem. And those are the people, I think, That's the right attitude to have. And so I can sit here and intellectually tell you all the reasons why I'm pessimistic about the future of media and the future of advertising. But if I woke up every day with that kind of pessimism, I wouldn't want to get anything. And so you got to rely on your heart, not your head. And you got to be proactive. And people who succeed are people who are proactive.
Do you think personally then that you mentioned that in the book, I believe it was one of the co-founders of College Humor now works at, was it Facebook?
He works at Facebook.
Yeah, and
he's
his
married to Alice Williams.
right, and his sort of thing is that like privacy is dead. You know, who needs privacy anyway? What is your personal take on the importance of privacy in 2018?
I often, when I'm asked, you know, a site asks, do we have access to your cookies? I say no. And sometimes I can't get on the site because that's what they. You know, deceived by messages being streamed and sent to you. I mean, I do. I mean, I see people not in ads, but it drives me nuts. So, and part of that is because they know so much about me. And you'd be shocked, by the way, shocked. I was shocked as I got into this, how much they know about you. I mean, they may not know your name, but they know you know, your computer address, they know where you live. They just know a lot of stuff about you.
Yeah, and you mentioned, when you brought up Facebook, the amount of data that a company like Facebook, Google, Amazon, we're all using Amazon. Just ask South Point, they'll let you know we're all using Amazon. When the amount of data that they have on us puts them at an interesting advantage over the industry, because now Facebook and Google have started agencies within their own organizations that are now competing with the big six, the mainstream agencies, while partnering with those agencies. And then they're also allowing small companies to be more competitive by leveraging that data, by building an ad within the Facebook platform. I mean, you must have some vision for where this is going to fall out over the next couple of years.
Well, I mean, think about data. Google has great data on what you search for, so they know what you're interested in. And we're talking about billions of bits of data, not millions, not thousands, billions. And Facebook has great data because they know what you and your friends are talking about. But the actual best data is held by Amazon, because Amazon knows what you purchase. And they have tremendous amount of data. How many of you have an Alexa in your house? Fair enough with you, right? I mean, I'm in a hotel room doing an interview in San Francisco with my book, and I'm talking on the phone to a radio reporter, and I say, "Well, you know, I have Alexa." Yes? I had no idea it was in the room. I had Alexa in the room with me. But they have all this data, and what is Amazon doing? Amazon is the fastest growing advertising platform. It is growing like a rocket. And they're increasingly getting into the advertising business, which they hadn't been in. And by the way, the advertising agencies love it because they feel it's a countervailing force to Google and Facebook. They won't love it in 5 years. When Amazon basically says, if you go on Amazon today and say, I want to buy batteries, right? What is Alexa? I want to buy a battery. You know what Alexa's going to show you? An Amazon battery. And think about the battery makers and how they feel. And so what's going to happen? The battery makers or other clients are going to say, hey, Amazon, if we pay you when you feature our products, and then Amazon's going to have to make a choice between money and credibility. Because if they do that, they're undermining their credibility. They're not growth. But that's a huge, huge moving issue.
Lauren?
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier about staying optimistic and also staying relevant. So for the more than 80% of folks in here who are interested in careers in advertising, strategic communications, or PR, how would you advise us as we are entering into the job force, or re-entering in my case, to navigate that sphere? As it's imploding, as companies are kind of combining, the lines are getting more blurred between each specific art form, a media form. What would you advise for our students?
I mean, I think, It was one of the best graduation speeches I ever watched on YouTube. Steve Jobs gave a graduation speech this thing. And he basically talked about his life. And he said, his advice to the students, the graduating class, is saying, follow your passion. Do what really interests you and love and really have some passion. And that, I think, is just great advice. Do what moves you, if you really feel like you want to do, if you're not confident. You're young enough. You get away with it. You make a mistake, you jump and do something else. But if you know enough, and you may not, I mean, I think about my own life and how many different rivers I've followed. I mean, I have a graduate degree in political science, and I write about the media. Go through that. But nevertheless, there are surprises and twists and turns in fate. Follow your passion and do that. And if you have that passion, you're going to trust the people who sign your checks. And you're going to, they're going to say, hey, I like it.
Okay, I want to make sure that I get questions from the audience. We always promise that. But if not, I'm sending it back to Gary. Who would like to ask a question? Got to get you to stand up and talk loud. I'll repeat it if necessary. Who's got a question here? Yes, sir.
I just have a question about how does net neutrality factor into your transaction for the concern more particular advertising
And how will net neutrality affect the industry? Will it help the bigger firms or the firms that are there now, or help the startups? Make sense?
Net neutrality basically is saying that you should pay the same amount, no matter whether you hog more space, broadband space, or less. So Netflix will pay basically comparable to what you pay for your email. And powerful companies like Netflix and Google and Facebook promulgate that. I think the basic question, before I can answer the big question, is the technical question. And that is, because the Netflixes and the Amazons and the Googles and Facebook take up so much traffic on the broadband highway, do they slow or affect what each of us, our job? If they do, if the capacity is limited, then they should pay more. That would be my view. That net neutrality should, they should be paying more. Not they shouldn't be. Now, how does it affect your question? How does it affect advertising? And obviously, if people are paying more, it would affect advertising. But I don't think this is an issue that is front and burner for the ad agencies. I don't think they really run it a whole lot because it's not front and burner. States like California have legislation on net neutrality, but it's an issue, particularly the Trump administration, that's basically shoved off.
If Amazon is controlling things as much as you just said, I can't resist my own question. And Trump is saying that, that Bezos is running the world now in the Washington Post, and he's going to have Amazon. Is it collusion?
I don't think there's any question that Trump, his worries about Amazon have to do with the fact that Bezos owns the Washington Post.
Yeah.
I don't think he thinks about Amazon. And just by the way, his opposition to the AT&T merger with Time Warner, I think was driven by his hatred of CNN and Jeff Zucker, who used to be his boss at NBC. I find that really shocking. Actually, the head of the Justice Department, antitrust division, would take a position simply because the president was pushing it. Didn't make a lot of sense. Having covered Microsoft, they were guilty of abusive behavior. The evidence that AT&T was guilty of behavior was
We have time for one more question. Who else out there would like to get it? Gary will give you extra points. Okay, I got that. Okay. Here's Gary's plan.
When you were reading your last one, I'm sure there was a lot of you really put it like on record. You were able to pick one person who was willing to cooperate in the room with them. Nothing about what it's whatever, being others and very questions you ask.
I feel one of the deficiencies, one of the cavities, the holes, was I wanted to sit in the process when the ad agency and the client at the very beginning, when the client picks an ad agency, chooses among several agencies, how they choose, and then how that agency with the client crafts an ad campaign, and then how that agency. So I went to AT&T in the summer of 2016. They were doing between Omnicom and WPP to choose an agency. The head of marketing at AT&T and head of communications at AT&T, I persuaded them it would be a good thing to allow me to be a client of one. I said, this is great. Follow this over. The agencies were willing if the client was willing. And then it went up to, I believe what happens, the CEO, I'm not certain of this, but I believe what happened. He said, that's crazy. No, we're going through a government review of whether we should be allowed to do these deals, and we're going to allow this reporter to sit in on meetings. I don't want to do it. But I always felt, I wish I had succeeded with that. It would have been at least a chapter, and it would have given the reader a real sense of how that was, and how the data and stuff, and how it's positioned. I mean, I had a lot of people. I was the only one that I can think of that wouldn't talk. There was a guy named Alex Dvorsky, who had left advertising, moved to Colorado, actually just came back in Denver. Really creative guy, and he went against advertising. He said it was really bad. He's since come back and embraced it, which is interesting in itself. But I wanted to do him. I think we had an email exchange, and he said, I don't know. That's the only. Everyone else, I remember.
And there was somebody behind you at the young woman. There's two of you, so you'll get the last one. So really projects.
I was wondering if you could please discuss native advertising and your take on it and where
And native advertising, which is sort of bought journalism, or it's somebody paying for it, placing it somewhere. What's your thoughts on it?
Native advertising is in many ways very similar to advertorials. The old advertorials would be at the top, and the advertising at the top, and there would be stories from the client. Increasingly, native ads is camouflage. It's printed to look like a news story, same type, and so it's really camouflage. And the New York Times, which is more reveals a little more than the others do. But all of them, as I cover this book, in the early days of my reporting, native advertising was the new rule. And they thought, oh my God, this is going to save us. Well, it didn't save us. And it didn't save me for a couple of reasons. One, it is dishonest, basically. It's basically a way of tricking the reader. And if you're in the credibility business, there's a danger to that. But the bigger problem is an economic problem. A native ad is crafted for that client. It's a story that writers at the newspaper, let's say, create about the product. They try not to mention the client personally. But it's a story, but it's individually done. It's not like a 30-second TV WhatsApp ad that can be repeated multiple times. So the problem with the native ad is, in the lingo of the advertising business world, it doesn't scale. Meaning it's very hard to replicate it many, many times. And therefore, it's almost a one-shot thing. It's a very expensive way to do one shot or multiple shot. So I don't think it's salvation. They'll do it and they'll get some revenues from it, but it doesn't offer salvation.
And that young woman behind you, you get the last question right there. Mike, you had a question? Okay, you got it. You're up. Go.
Okay. So going into the advertising field, we could learn one like supplemental skill, like computer science or stats. What do you think it should be?
Well, it depends on what in the advertising field you're doing. If you're going to be dealing with data, be an engineer or data scientist.
Data scientists make a lot of money. I've been trying to hire them. I can't get them. I go somewhere else for more money.
It's creative. By the way, you got the same problem that you face from the people all the time. It's because of inflation, which loves important skill for journalists. I mean, you could make an argument that if you want to be a journalist, learn multiple skills. Learn how to do a podcast, learn how to do blog, learn how to write and video, and all those things. But essentially, what you need for all of them is storytelling. You know how to tell a story. Imagine you're sitting around a campfire, you're telling people around that campfire a story. So storytelling is an essential to that. But it depends on what part of the business you want to do.
Storytelling is the essence of what we do here in the School of Media and Journalism, and every one of you knows that that's part of it. I wanted to say a couple of thank yous to Carter and Valerie and Lauren and Gary for really starting the conversation. Coming out tonight, and I want to echo a little bit of what Ken said. I never wanted to be anything but a woman reporter because there were no women reporters when I started. So that was as far as my goal went. I've been everything you could possibly be. I've been every job, my fourth career. You're going to have lots of different jobs. But what you hear tonight, why I have optimism, is I get to spend my time with you. I get the time to hear you ask the questions and to be cynical and to say things are different. And this is a revolutionary moment in our industry. You heard him. He doesn't have the answer. One thing I know the students at UNC will never say, gee, I never thought about that, like the advertising leaders you were talking about. We're forcing you to think about what we don't know and think about the ethical implications and think about what you want to be. I can tell that Auletta did that political science graduate degree and he's still really interested in policy. You heard it in every answer. Think about what is your passion. Don't let us down. My optimism is because I don't know what the future is, but I depend on you to make it better than what it is right now. Challenge us. No one's going to stop you. It's not like we're going to tell you how to do it. You're going to help us figure out how to do it. What better than be 20 and not having people tell you what to do? For that, I get to say, you got to go. It's after 5. Thanks very much.